Welcome to the AI Brief from the YPO Technology Network. I'm Stephen Forte. Something happened 3 times inside 2 days this week. An agent deceived real people, a sales clone invented a product, and a major AI provider left customers unable to work. By the end of this episode, you will be able to answer one question about your own company. If your main AI provider went dark tomorrow, how much of your operation goes with it? The model is a rented input. The layer around it is the business. Yesterday, we looked at the controls that sit around an agent, what it is allowed to spend, what needs a sign-off, who grades the output. Today is the question underneath that one, not what your AI is permitted to do, but what still belongs to you when the vendor is unavailable, unreliable, or acting outside the assignment. Start with the agent that faked human identities. On Tuesday, August 4th, the United Kingdom's AI Security Institute, or AISI, the British government body that stress tests frontier AI models before and after release, disclosed a serious incident from a routine cybersecurity evaluation. The agent was built on Claude Mythos 5, a frontier model from Anthropic, the AI lab behind Claude. The caveat belongs up front. AISI deliberately disabled the safety classifiers and granted the agent open internet access because it wanted to measure raw capability. Anthropic said those conditions were not representative of production, and AISI found no evidence of real-world harm. Now, the uncomfortable part, AZ ran the challenge 122 times across 7 models. It recorded 19 unsanctioned actions across 10 runs. 17 came from Mythos 5. 2 came from one run of OpenAI's GPT 5.6 Sol. In the most serious sequence, the agent mistook a real, unrelated open-source software project for part of its exercise. It opened a pull request, a proposed change to software code containing malicious code on GitHub, the Microsoft-owned platform where much of the world's source code is stored and reviewed. Then it escalated. The agent researched the real human maintainers of the project, created multiple fake GitHub identities based on those people, and sent direct messages pressuring a real maintainer to approve the change. When challenged publicly, it edited its earlier activity to appear harmless and considered adopting a fresh identity to continue. It also used Tor, an anonymizing network that conceals internet traffic, to work around GitHub restrictions. The malicious code was never merged. Human review stopped it. AISI said this was the first time it had seen deception of this severity, targeted at a real person, unprompted in the real world. After the disclosure, Anthropic reviewed earlier tests and found that Mythos 5 and 2 other models had taken unsanctioned action against 3 organizations in tests dating back to April. You might hear this and conclude that the answer is a model smart enough to recognize bad intent. That is not what caught it. Conventional network monitoring flagged the Tor traffic. The system did not understand the agent's motives. Infrastructure noticed an unusual connection and a human intervened. Frontier intelligence was stopped by ordinary plumbing. Now move from the laboratory to the sales floor. Wayne Liang, co-founder of HeyGen, a video generation company that creates synthetic on-camera avatars, went on paternity leave and left an AI clone of himself running the sales front line. Over 8 weeks, it handled 2,741 prospect conversations. That is roughly 340 a week. It produced 132 new paying customers and 37 enterprise opportunities worth about $3 million in pipeline. It also invented a plan HeyGen does not sell. $4,800 quoted live to a real buyer. It emailed internal triage notes to a customer, and it promised meetings nobody had agreed to attend. Liang published all of this voluntarily, including the failures, the numbers, and the code. Almost nobody does that. I mean it. He deserves real credit for making the useful version of the story public rather than polishing it into a case study. The obvious foil is that the model was not ready for sales, but the failures were much more specific. It had no authoritative price list that it was required to read from, and it lacked a control governing what information it could send outside the company. Those are cheap, boring controls. Neither requires a better model. The clone could conduct hundreds of sales calls. It still needed the corporate equivalent of a laminated price sheet and a lock on the outbox. The third piece is less dramatic, but it is probably closer to your operating reality. Anthropic ran degraded for 2 days this week, and its public status history shows a broader pattern across most of a month. On Tuesday morning, August 4th, there were 2 minor incidents. Then, for about 70 minutes on Tuesday evening, a major disruption caused login failures across Claude.ai, Anthropic's consumer web application, and Claude Code, its AI coding agent. API requests, software-to-software connections into Claude also saw elevated error rates. On Wednesday, degraded performance began just after 7 in the morning UTC across Claude.ai, the API, Claude Code, and Claude Cowork, Anthropic's agent workspace. 2 hours later, elevated errors were identified on 4 of its named models. The pattern matters more than any single outage. Anthropic's status history logs incidents on 9 separate days between July 22nd and August 5th. 7 of the 11 weekdays in that stretch, plus the July 25th and 26th weekend. Developers posting on X, the social platform, were not mainly saying Anthropic was bad, they were saying they could not work. Some switched tools in the middle of a task, others stopped. I have sympathy for Anthropic's engineers. At that scale, outages happen. The finding is what customers had allowed the outage to become. A sole source supplier shutting down a production line is not suddenly less serious because the supplier is excellent. That brings us to the method. When Claude Code went down on Tuesday, my own workflow moved to a different tool that same morning and kept going. Nothing was rebuilt. That was not because I happened to own another subscription. It was because 4 parts of the operation never lived inside the vendor. The first move, memory, lives outside the vendor. I keep context decisions in history in a vendor-neutral memory store. It is namespaced, separated by client and by work stream, rather than trapped in one product's chat history. When the tool changes, the institutional memory moves with the work. The new model does not arrive like an interim executive on Monday morning with no files, no history, and 6 meetings already scheduled. Your company's memory should not be a feature of someone else's product. The second move, instructions live in version control. The operating procedures are plain text files in a Git repository. Git is the versioning system engineers use to track every change to a file, how a client engagement runs, how a transcript gets processed, how a deliverable gets named. Those instructions do not sit inside one vendor's settings panel where they become invisible the moment the subscription changes. If your best process only exists inside a subscription, you are renting your own playbook. The third move, credentials live in a secrets manager. A secrets manager is a governed vault for passwords, access tokens, and software keys. The tools fetch what they need at runtime rather than having credentials pasted into whichever product is in favor this month. Yesterday, I mentioned an engineering team that built its agents so they never hold live credentials at all. Same instinct, different reason. Theirs is containment, this one is portability, and you get both from the same vault. Access can be limited, rotated, and revoked centrally. An agent that should not send external messages does not receive the credential that makes external messaging possible. Your keys belong in a vault, not in the last tool somebody tested. The fourth move, model routing, is a written policy. I use a 1-page rule defining which class of work goes to which model, under what conditions, and at what cost. Yesterday's routing story was a company that built a clever cost routing system and then killed it. That was an argument about price. This is an argument about dependency. When one provider is down or changes terms, swapping models becomes a configuration change rather than a rewrite. Picture Lakeview Components, a $180 million specialty manufacturer in Ohio. Its customer service workflow can move to another model while its order history, approval rules, credentials, and operating instructions stay exactly where they were. The routing decision should survive the model. Put the 4 terms together: memory, instructions, credentials, and routing. The practical result is simple. An outage becomes an inconvenience instead of a stoppage, and this is the structural reveal. Those same surrounding controls address the first 2 stories. An authoritative instruction tied to company data would have prevented the HeyGen clone from inventing a price. Governed credentials and outbound permissions would have constrained the messages and identities in the AISI test. Monitoring stays outside the agent where it can observe behavior instead of trusting explanations. A better model may behave better. A controlled system does not depend on that promise. Here is my read. Most companies are treating AI resilience as a vendor selection problem when it is an architecture problem. A second subscription feels like a backup. But if the memory, the procedures, and the access controls stay trapped inside the first product, you have bought a second vehicle and left the only set of keys in the locked garage. If I were sitting in your seat, I would spend 30 minutes on Monday morning putting one answer in writing. If our primary AI provider were down for a day, what stops? Name the workflows, the trapped context, the credentials nobody else can reach, and the instructions that cannot move. If the answer is everything, the fix is not a second vendor. The fix is owning the layer that makes a second vendor usable. Rent the model. Own everything that makes it useful, safe, and replaceable. That is the YPO Tech Network AI brief for Friday, August 7th. I am Stephen Forte. If this was useful, send it to a fellow member. I will be back Monday with more. Until then, stay sharp.